Google, Apple, and Verizon say it's 6:30, so out of respect for everyone's time, we'll get started. Good evening and welcome. Let the people in the room know this is also being live streamed for anybody who wanted to watch online and listen. Because of the fact we don't have a sound system here, this microphone in the ceiling where you see the green light, that's how people online will hear our conversation. So you can either write your question down, bring it up, and I'll read it when we get to the question portion. Or we ask people, if you're able, to come to the podium so that you're close to that microphone and so everybody out in the internet land can hear you as well. My name is John Belford. I'm the Chief of Police here at London Township. And with me is our Fiscal Officer, Joanne Burry. And we are here to present a public forum Q&A, question and answer session on issue 34, the London Township Police Levy. This levy, as published by the Board of Elections, is a 4.48 mil, $157 for each 100,000 of the county auditor's appraised value, continuing period of time commencing in 2025. Because we are here in our official capacity, neither myself nor Fiscal Officer Burry can advocate for or against an issue. That's not why we're here. We're here simply to present information and to answer questions about that. So it's completely up to the voters what they want to do, so we want to make sure the voters have all the information possible. We'd like to start with a brief slide presentation where Fiscal Officer Burry is going to discuss the financials and the budgetary implications of the levy. And then I am going to have a few slides to discuss the operational effect of the levy passing or not passing on the police department. And then we'll open it up for questions, both your written questions or if you want to come up to the podium and ask a question. Like I said, we have a relatively informal format here tonight. So if halfway through you decide I want to write a question down, you can always go back and see Katie at the back table and write a question down. She'll bring it up to me. If you want your question read by me or the fiscal officer, or ask anonymously, or you can come up to the podium. If you remember a question after you sit back down, we welcome you to come on back up. Our goal is to get as much information out to the public as possible. And if somebody here in the room has a question, I'll guarantee you somebody out there watching on the internet has the same question. So we want to make sure we get all those questions answered. Anything else for opening remarks?
No.
Okay, with no further ado, we'll get to the presentation, and I'll defer to Fiscal Officer Burry.
So the first thing that I'm going to show you is kind of where we have been financially, kind of showing you the life of the past levy, and then what we're projecting moving forward, which created the need for us to put this levy on the ballot. So this is where we were, or where we currently are. So I think one of the questions, which I'll go ahead and answer now, is when was the last police levy? It was tax year 2019. First collection year was 2020. So seeing that there was a similar 5-year projection done. So in 2020, you kind of see our expenditures, salaries and benefits representing the most, followed by contract services and materials and supplies. Once that levy started, we were in pretty good shape. And then as we progress through that 5-year timeline, as projected, you could see where then that life of that levy is kind of coming to an end. Kind of putting this in dollars and cents on the next slide, kind of showing that same thing, kind of converting that chart into what that means dollar-wise. So seeing as we kind of hit 2023, started using some of that fund balance that we were kind of generating in the beginning when the levy was new. Coming to the end here in 2025, where we currently are and where we're projecting to be at the end of the year, is that we're going to use about $542,000 of that fund balance, kind of bringing it down now to kind of a critical state, right? There's not enough fund balance to support a full year of operation, maybe about a 6-month run or so. So now where are we going, and what led to the need for this levy? So very similar chart, kind of seeing if we did nothing and we just left the property tax millage where it was, this is what our chart out would look like. And you can see where our expenditures are well exceeding what we're currently bringing in today. So going in to look at that in dollars and cents again, kind of seeing 2025 as kind of that last year that we have any fund balance. And then moving from 2026 to 2030, where we base the 5-year projection on. So showing our rundown and how much more we're spending over the revenue we're bringing in. From 2026 to 2027 gives you that about $7.5 million shortfall over the next 5 years. So simple math, dividing that by 5 gives us almost 1.5 million that we're projecting we're gonna need over the next 5 years to support the police department through 2030. When we went to the county auditors, we told them to please tell us what 1.4 million per year would look like. Again, these are all projections. We're trying to do the best to forecast, assuming certain things, assuming our police force is gonna stay at the current level, assuming that there's gonna be those increases, knowing that just the cost of contracts and services, materials and supplies is gonna continue to escalate over that 5-year period. So knowing that, you know, we're forecasting the best we can, but we still don't wanna ask for too much, right? So our projection was close to 1.5 million, but we went back to the county auditor and said, tell us what millage we would need to produce about 1.4 million per year. That came out to the 4.48 mils that we're asking for now. Now, I'll turn it over to the chief, and he's going to talk about operations and kind of what does it mean. I talked a lot about what the property tax is bringing in, what we're spending. So now maybe making more sense about what those dollars are, what the staffing levels look like, and what is the work that they do every day for all of you.
So we thought it would be helpful to make sure everybody understands how the police department is organized and how we operationally put this into providing police services for the township. So this is our current organizational structure. We have 3 shifts. They are from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So there's your 24 hours around the clock. So you'll see you have a supervisor and 3 officers on each shift. That's necessary to keep 2 officers out all the time because there's going to be 2 days off for each officer through the week. There's going to be vacation time. There's going to be sick time. So on some shifts, we will have 3 officers out. On some, we'll only have 2 out. But we have to maintain this structure to keep a minimum of 2 officers out all the time. We have 2 civilians in our administrative bureau, records, expungements, making sure traffic tickets get sent down and processed, people requesting reports, get them from these ladies in the front office. And we have 1 unpaid reserve officer. That's one of our retired officers who stayed on. Because he's certified as an instructor in a lot of different fields like firearms, he continues to serve and he can qualify. Our other officers go down and run a range. 2 officers can go down and qualify, come back. The other 2 officers can go down. He can stay there. And that's at no cost to the township. He volunteers all of his time. We have 1 full-time detective. FT is full-time. And we should have 2 part-time detectives. However, right now we only have 1. Eric Moore retired and went over to code enforcement, retired from his job at the county. He was also a part-time officer here. Went over to the code enforcement or development department, and Taylor Dewart remains in this position. We didn't fill that because when he left, fiscal officer told us that we were into some austerity measures we need to implement to get close to this levy, and then the first 2 levies did not pass. Next slide, please. All right, so what we did was we kind of grabbed some statistics that are usually of most interest to residents. If we didn't pick these different activities, we'd be looking at charts like this, and we wouldn't be able to see all the things the officers do and all the crimes that we're tracking. So we took the dispatch runs. How many dispatch runs we had in 2019? You see, 5,635 pickup runs. The difference there is a dispatch run means somebody called the sheriff's office dispatcher. They'll answer our line, Blenheim Township Police, because that's how it works for all the villages and the townships in Franklin County. We contract with them because it's much too expensive to run your own radio room. And if that dispatcher sends our officer out, that's a dispatch run. But if our officer is driving around on patrol and he finds a broken window, and he stops, or he comes upon a crash, comes upon a lost child, comes upon anything, and he calls the radio dispatcher, that's called a pickup run. So that's how many times these officers are working a theft, a missing persons, a crash, any event that then goes into our dispatch system and is tracked. House checks, that means when you're on vacation, you call the police department. They'll come by and check your house. You tell us what cars are going to be there and what lights are going to be on, and we'll make sure it's right. And if it's not, we'll call you because you leave your number. Business checks, we do the same thing for the businesses. So that gives you a picture of what this looks like. In that year, because I'm telling you how this one looks so that when we kind of fast forward through the years, you'll be able to just look at the colors here. We had 19 assaults. They wrote 812 traffic citations. That's where the officer sees somebody speeding and pulls them over. Crash citations, 332. Most of those we were dispatched to the scene of a crash and we cited the at-fault driver. We responded to 29 domestic violence incidents, 35 drug activities. We had 92 information reports, and we took 146 theft reports. You see how that translates into the crime here, and now that makes more sense when you look at these charts as we go through the years. So here we had a drop in dispatch runs, had less dispatch runs that year, and you can see how that goes, and the color chart of the breakdown. And again, like I said, we just took criminal activity that's of most interest to the resident. There is a lot of other activity going on. And next slide, we go to 2020. You can see the breakdown. Somebody asked about suicide attempts versus, you'll see later, suicide investigations. So a suicide attempt is usually a dispatch run or somebody calls up for help and our officers respond. Most of our officers are what's called CIT trained, crisis intervention training. It's an additional 40-hour training program in addition to the police academy. It's not required, but my goal is to send every single officer to CIT training. We're trying to get everybody in there. We've got a few that still have to go, and it's free. The federal government pays for it. So our officers go and talk to the person, get them linked up with social services or a suicide hotline, or get them to the hospital. That's a suicide attempt. So they responded to 24 there, and 248 thefts. You'll see theft keeps coming up as one of the crimes we deal with the most. Next chart, please. 2022. See the dispatch runs and the pickup runs are remaining kind of steady. Assaults are remaining kind of steady. Citations pretty steady. Next. 23. And on to 24, which is the last full year's activities. So a lot of people, we want to get these numbers up here because a lot of people just don't understand how much crime and how much police activity is in Blenheim Township. There is quite a bit. These officers are responding to those, and I'm going to get to this in a moment. We had a staffing study done where they took all this computer-aided dispatch called CAD information and did a manpower analysis against our current staffing and said, they also look at priority runs, like a domestic violence call is a 2-officer run, not a single officer run. A theft report is a 1-officer run. They looked at that and used that to determine that we were much understaffed, and this is beyond the typical model of how many officers do you need for a certain population. Well, 10,000 people in the middle of Cornfield County might need less officers than 10,000 people sandwiched between Westerville and Columbus. So what kind of calls you're getting, what's your call volume like, how many priority runs? Okay, next. So that's our patrol bureau, and then our detective bureau takes over if there's a criminal incident that requires follow-up that's going to take too much time so the officers wouldn't be able to get to their next calls, or it's going to go outside the township, like maybe they got to go down to the jail and interview people or follow up leads in another county. So that's when it goes over to our detective bureau. And you can see our detective bureau has been very busy. Now they have investigated 5 homicides in the last 5 years. And I would say it's actually 6 because we have a cold case from 1993 that has a full cold case team, including our detectives, our officers, members of our team, other police departments, Ohio BCI. That team from the initial team, which was the responding officers at the time, who went as long as they could with the case. It was the case went cold, and we formed a new team with some of those officers and some new officers. That went on for years. We reinvigorated it by having a new team, new prosecutors coming in. We have prosecutors on the team, BCI agents, state investigators, Columbus Police homicide investigators, Blendon Township detectives, Blendon Township officers. We take a look at all the evidence again. We go out and we go back to all the scenes. We review all the lab results. We get lab technicians in there as part of the team. So that's a whole ongoing homicide investigation. Now, there was some confusion about this. This is not the homicides that occurred in Blendon Township. These are the ones we investigated. Because we also did have an officer-involved shooting where BCI investigated that. So that doesn't count here as one of our investigations. However, that was a homicide that occurred in the township. You can watch the trend in burglaries there, going up and then back down. I'm proud to report almost every year our detective bureau has dwarfed the national average on clearing cases. We were well above the national average on clearing burglaries, B&Es, auto thefts, crimes of violence, felonious assault, homicides. So of the homicides we investigated, we have 6 up there. We only had 2 unsolved. The cold case, one with De Palma from 1993, and our most recent homicide, which our detectives and BCI and Columbus Police are still working. Death scenes. That's where someone died unattended under some sort of circumstances that their doctor wouldn't sign a death certificate. The coroner's going to come out with a forensic investigator, and our detectives are going to help investigate that death scene for the coroner as a joint investigation. In case it is determined to be criminal activity, then our detectives take over and follow up. Sexual assaults. When I was the detective from 1995 to 2005, we averaged 7 to 8 sexual assaults a year. So across the board, sexual assaults are down. That's the really good news. But we do have detectives that go out and investigate these, respond to hospitals in the middle of the night, and you can see they also sort of peaked and then started falling off again, which is good news. Shots fired with someone struck, so that someone did get wounded by the shots, and then shots fired where no one was injured. We've had incidents where shots were fired at someone but hit a house, hit a car, and we still got successful prosecutions. Extradited a guy from Virginia, state of Virginia, and got 8 years in prison for him. The Columbus Police, the prosecutors were amazed. They said, they kept asking, who got shot? Well, nobody did. They shot at him, but they hit his house and they hit a neighbor's car. And you guys did 2 search warrants and extradited a guy from Virginia over that? Yes, we did. We go the extra mile. I tell people all the time, we're in what I call the sweet spot of law enforcement, in that we have always had enough resources, enough crime to justify the resources, and enough resources to spend time clearing the cases. If the levy fails, I'll get to that in a minute, the Detective Bureau will stand down. It'll be the County Sheriff's Detective Bureau that takes over. And these kind of clearance rates and this kind of extra effort, not to say anything bad about the Sheriff's Office, they've just got the entire county. They've got a lot more crime per detective than we do here. So there's just, and the priorities are the priorities of the county, not the priorities of the community. We prioritized the crimes in Blendon Township. We had an incident where someone was going around at night scratching cars with a pair of scissors and stealing LGBTQ flags, taking flags and stickers and signs out of people's yards where they said, you know, in this house we believe, taking those and then scratching the cars. Our detectives worked very hard on that case, analyzed a lot of traffic camera, followed up a lot of leads, interviewed people, did surveillance, followed this guy at night, turned out to be the wrong guy, found a new suspect, followed him, got the confession, and not only cleared the cases that happened in Blendon Township, but cleared even more than that cases in Columbus. So our investigation actually was used by Columbus to prosecute this guy for the crimes down there. Robberies, they've been getting less. We're glad of that. We tend to think a lot of these things are affected by effective patrol. We had one time a Columbus narcotics officer called up, and he said, hey, I'm going to be making a drug deal down at Glengarry Shopping Center. The guy wants to meet me at Glengarry Shopping Center. And can you guys have a couple cars in the area just in case, out of sight but in the area? And we said, yeah, what time are you meeting him? Well, just before the time, he called back and said, never mind, the guy wouldn't meet at Glengarry. He said, Blendon Township Police has pulled him over in Blendon Township before. He wants to meet down the road at Iron Pony in Columbus's jurisdiction. So this active patrolling, I mean, it's anecdotal, I don't have statistic evidence, but I believe this active patrolling actually pushes some of this crime out of the township and can be why you're seeing less robberies here. Stolen vehicles, huge spike in 2022. When we applied for a federal grant, because Fiscal Officer Burry said if the levy doesn't pass, you're going to have to lay off 4 officers. So we did apply for a federal grant and a state grant. In case the levies fail, we hopefully we do qualify for these grants. Hopefully we get them. But the feds called up and said, we think there's a problem with your application. They said, it looks like you've had way too many car thefts for the size and location of your community. And we went back and pulled reports and sent them to them and said, yes, we have had that many car thefts. These have been gangs, teenage gangs. Actually, if you saw it on the news, they identified 6 different gangs. They called one of them the Blendon Gang. Well, none of these guys lived in Blendon Township. It was because our detectives had identified these guys. So that was why they called them the Blendon Gang, because they were identified by Blendon detectives, but they were operating out of Columbus. But yeah, it was unbelievable, the spike in car thefts we got. Felony thefts, that's, not petty thefts, which would be like stealing a lawnmower, but a felony theft, somebody stealing $6,000 out of someone's bank account would be a felony theft. Someone stealing a car, except we do track cars separately. Fatal overdoses, our detectives do go out and investigate those, and that is a very concerning number right there, 0007. Suicides, now these are the suicides that our detectives did investigate. They weren't suicide attempts. You'll see that the difference between those numbers come up later. Felonious assaults, that's where someone is assaulted where they could have died or they were seriously injured. A lot of those were shootings. And firearms recovered out of crimes, meaning a lot of these were stolen cars that we got. We'd recover a stolen car. Sometimes the person would flee and ditch the car fast and jump and run through the woods, and we'd get the car, and we'd find a gun in the car, and we'd call somebody up and we'd say, hey, we've got your car and we've got your gun. And he'd say, I didn't have a gun. And we'd find out the gun was stolen out of another car theft in Columbus that then they transferred into the car that they stole from Blendon Township. All right, next slide, please. That's what your detective bureau is doing. And then there's your upward track on firearms recovered out of cars. We're getting more and more guns. We spiked real hard on, like I said, on stolen vehicles. That started to drop off a little bit, but definitely not back to pre-pandemic levels yet. Felony thefts, they've been up and down. That's kind of a pipe organ there. Shots fired with no injuries. Bullets were flying a lot during the pandemic, as you can see. We started to track down. We were feeling good about that. We've been tracking back up now. Okay, so what we did was we took all that data, and you can have a copy of that. We're going to put an email up on the screen at the end, and if you want a copy of all these PowerPoint slides, we'll email them to you. And you can have time to look at them in a little more detail. But we took this and we said, okay, what are the averages based on now, or if the department would have to lay off 4 officers? So right now, looking at that average that I just showed you over the years, we averaged those 5 years out. Each officer would be responding to 482 calls. However, if those layoffs happen and we had the same level of crime, each officer would be responding to 804 calls instead of 42. Each officer the average pickup call was 4,055, so that's when the officer's on patrol and finds things. But the way we did this, we had help from the staffing study people, is if you have less officers, they're going to be busier on these dispatch calls, so they are going to have less time to patrol pickup calls. So pickup runs would be expected to drop almost in half. Each officer does this many house checks. Each officer would only be able to do this many house checks, business checks, 20,000 to 12,000. And then there we showed what it looks like. This is how the workload would shift if we had to lay off all these officers. Okay, and how the house checks, business checks, and pickup runs would shift. Next slide, please. Okay, that's our presentation, and we're here to let you know some of the ground truth. So this started with the fiscal officer saying if the levy doesn't pass, we're going to have to lay off 4 officers. Since then, 1 officer has already left, transferred to another department out of state. So that drops it to 3 officers that we'd have to lay off if the levy doesn't pass. Just today, we got notification of one of our other officers, received notice from another city in the area that he's been hired over there, so he's going to be leaving us next month. Another officer said he got a phone call from a city in another county that he's going to be leaving us, but he doesn't have it in writing yet. He'll be leaving us next month also. So that's 3 that will be leaving, 1 that already did, and 2 that will probably leave in this month. What that does is it starts to put us into a downward spiral. And these officers still have to deal with the same call volume, so they're getting much busier. They're having less officers on the shift with them, so some of them are already starting to work a single car shift. And they're having their time off denied because we need them to work. So that can be expected in any organization to go into an HR downward spiral, to where now people look at these opportunities because almost every department started having less applications and more people retiring early after the riots in the summer of George Floyd. So that had a shock effect across the HR spectrum in law enforcement. Less applications in, more people taking those early outs. So the other cities are in the same problem we are trying to find and hire officers. So they're offering lateral transfers. So an officer could transfer to step D pay on this department and not lose money not have to go back to step A entry level pay. They'll keep the pay the same and bring them over, and they don't lose money. So they're also being transferred. They're not only losing money, but they're topping out higher because they're paid more. So our staffing study did say that if you look at Central Ohio as a market, as a job market, that we are paying market minus. So for similar sized communities, for similar sized budgets, with similar call volume and a similar number of priority runs, we are paying our officers less than what most communities in Central Ohio are. So we're market minus on pay, and then on suggested staffing, we're market minus on staffing. So what the staffing study came out, and again, you can request a copy of the staffing study, was that we need to hire 4 officers. The fiscal officer has said if the levy doesn't pass, we'll lose 4 officers, and we've already started losing them. If we lose 4, the levy passes, then we need to find 8, which is very difficult to find to get back up to where we were before and above. So we definitely, if the community feels that they want to maintain the same level of service, the same type of officer that we have, then that would indicate you would want to go into a, not market plus situation. The staffing study only recommends going into what's called a market match. You could still possibly lose officers to higher paying departments. But our officers have had that ability to transfer since about 2021. Almost everybody started opening up this lateral transfer thing because they weren't getting applicants otherwise. And they chose not to. And many of them chose not to because they love it here. And they have said they've enjoyed the community support that we've had here. I became an officer here in 1984. So I've been here 41 years. And I used to tell officers when I interviewed them, they'd ask the question, what's the community support like here? And I said, A police levy has never failed the whole time I've been here. Never failed. And then those levies did start to fail. And officers did start to look at that lateral transfer option. So I'm not telling the voters what to do. That's for the voters to decide. It's your resources, and you just give us the resources that you want us to have, and we'll do our best. If we end up with less than we need, we'll tell the Board of Trustees that, and I'll propose courses of action. We can do this. We can, like, one of the things we're going to have to do here real soon if we lose another officer is we're going to have to take that full-time detective, and Detective Nance is going to have to get moved out onto the street and start filling a shift. When that happens, that means we're going to refer those follow-on cases to Franklin County. Franklin County is going to prioritize them, not what is the priority for Blenheim Township, what's a priority for the whole county. And Sheriff Baldwin, I don't fault him for that. He's got limited resources and a lot of crime in the county, and he has to do that. But that's a way of looking at what this community would lose if we go to that course of action and that option. And I tried to show you the volume of work that your detective bureau is doing. In the patrol realm, less officers also means higher response times. So if right now we have 2 officers out, they can respond to 2 priority 1 incidents, right? A theft in Huber Ridge and a theft in Sunbury Woods. They can only respond to 1 2-officer run, like a domestic violence call. So if both of them are on a domestic violence call or an injury crash, now the response time is going up for the theft in progress over here. If there's only 1 officer out, he's going to ask for a backup from the county sheriff. And that's going to increase the response time because they're patrolling other neighborhoods. They're going to have to stop what they're doing if they can. If they're on a priority run, they can't. They'll have to wait till somebody clears and comes here. If they can't, then we'll start saying, well, can you call Westerville and see if they're available? There's going to be a response delay. This is just sort of the operational impacts of having less officers. Higher response times, less involvement within the community of our own prioritization of resources. So right now, if this community decides, for us, parking is not that big a deal, but speed is. This community can come here to a Board of Trustees meeting and say that right there. Why are we messing around with parking tickets when we got all these speeding problems? And the Board of Trustees can say, Chief, we want you to emphasize speeding over parking. Conversely, if nobody can get in and out of their driveways and the parking is the problem that's bothering you the most, you can come here and tell the Board of Trustees that, and we can adjust our priorities to what this community feels is the most important problem. Okay? If we have the resources to do that. Within those resources, I'll give the Board of Trustees the courses of action that can hopefully satisfy those things. Another example is recently we had Immigrations and Customs Enforcement had a gentleman escape their custody at St. Anne's Hospital. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement asked for assistance. The Franklin County Sheriff's Office came and the Westerville Police came. And the Columbus Police helicopter came overhead. When it was determined that the person who was fleeing had civil charges and not criminal charges, the Westerville Police disengaged. The Columbus Police helicopter was there to help the Westerville Police. They disengaged. The county sheriff stayed and continued to assist the ICE officers. Okay. The Board of Trustees tells the police chief what type of activities they want the police department to engage in, to not engage in. And as long as it's within Ohio law and within the U.S. Constitution, what the trustees want, then that's what the chief of police does and adjusts the operations of the police department to do. It's up to the community what they want. Police departments are different than fire departments in that if your house is on fire, if you're trapped in your car, you want the first fire truck that can get there, right, with the jaws of life. You don't care if it's Columbus, you don't care if it's Westerville, you just want the first closest one. With police, it gets a little different. We don't want police officers from this community writing speeding tickets over in this community. Most Americans don't want that at all. For a long time, the people of Selma, Alabama resisted having canine officers on their police force, canine dogs. That had bad experiences in the civil rights movement, and they didn't want those dogs on the police department. Well, if the people of Selma, Alabama want their police to be a certain way, then those police can be that way, and the city council can change the police. A fire is a fire is a fire, and a car crash is a car crash is a car crash as far as the fire department is concerned. But people feel differently about the police. So keeping the police focused locally on what that community needs and wants. I always say police officers have to reflect the community that they serve. There's an old expression I heard many, many years ago. I always tell police officers when they complain about why we're doing anything, I said, hey, life is only easy for the police in a police state. Okay? It's hard to be the good guys. The good guys have to operate by the rules. And local police needs to operate in such a way as to serve the local community's needs and interests. And this is the kind of place where that can happen. I'm not saying that can't happen if this police department went away. A township can contract to have patrol vehicles come from the county sheriff's office. But now you're talking about going to a county commissioner's meeting. You go to a county commissioner's meeting and try to get them to get the sheriff to do something differently in Blendon Township than he does in the rest of the county. It just starts getting a little bit farther away from home and a little harder to have your voice heard on what kind of law enforcement you want. So the impacts go just kind of beyond that. There have been people on Facebook that say, you know, can't we just contract the sheriff's office? Well, right now, townships that contract the sheriff's office are paying $2.4 million to have 2 sheriff's cruisers in their neighborhoods, in their township, around the clock. $2.4 million to have these cars around the clock, 2 cars on. Could you put the slide back up on what it's costing us?
Oh, what it's costing them?
On our budget. I believe the number was close to 2.4 million. Can you steer into the right place there?
Yeah.
That's projected, one more. Should be 3 right there.
Okay. Now we're up to 2.5. 2.4 gets you 2 sheriff's departments, if you already have a contract. But one thing you should know is that the Franklin County Sheriff's Office did a new contract with the FOP, and their deputies became the highest paid officers in Central Ohio. That changed recently. OSU police just surpassed them. So those deputies were not the highest paid officers in Central Ohio when these contracts were written for $2.4 million. So townships who go to renew their contracts, or new townships seeking, will probably have a higher number, which means could you get 2 deputy sheriffs to patrol the neighborhood? Yes. Would it cost you what you're paying now? As much or more. But there wouldn't be the local connection. Our officers, there was a former trustee who said, this is like being a small town in the middle of a big city. We are surrounded by Columbus and Westerville. In many ways, people say, was it dangerous being a Blendon Township Police Department officer? Well, you have different precincts in Columbus. There are precincts that are less dangerous than Blendon Township. There are precincts that are more dangerous than Columbus. If you think of this is like a precinct in Columbus as far as crime and danger goes for the police officers. But the difference is nobody transfers in and out of this precinct. You get the same officers come into your house, the same people you've known throughout their careers. I've been your chief for 21 years now. I know a lot of you. That changes when you contract with a bigger agency, and the price can be expected to go up. Is that detective bureau coming out for your burglary? That depends if it's a priority in Franklin County, not if it's a priority in Blendon Township. If it's in Blendon Township, our detectives respond to every single burglary without fail. They'll be out there. If there's evidence that needs to be processed, they'll be there. Our officers also have fingerprint kits and are trained in fingerprinting. If it's just fingerprints or DNA collection, they can do that. It's not the same with a lot of other contract services that you might have. Before we wrap up and go to questions, if you want a copy of the slideshow, a copy of the slideshow would have all the numbers, a copy of anything else, If you think of any questions after you leave, you can email them to any one of us. I would suggest budgetary questions go to the fiscal officer. If you send them to me, I'll forward them to her. If you want copies of the slideshow, please send it to Pat Myers. And operational questions, please send to me. We did get some questions in writing. We can start with those. And then if you still have questions, come on up to the podium, or you can go back and see Katie and write the card. She'll bring it up to me, and we can try to get as many questions answered as possible. But again, I want to stress, if we don't get your question answered tonight, or if you think of something after you leave, these emails work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You think of it, send us an email. We'll get you an answer. We want you to have the most information you can to make your decision, whatever that decision is. And if the questions are, well, if it was this, what would you do? You know, operationally, I can probably tell you. If your questions are there any other monetary options? Like I did mention grants. We've applied for a federal grant. We've applied for a state grant. We don't know if we'll get them. Okay, if the levy goes through and passes, we won't qualify for those grants anymore. Those grants are for departments that either have had layoffs or are facing layoffs. So the levy passing would mean we would not have the grants. If you have questions about other alternate funding sources, are there different ways you could deploy your resources against the same problem if you had less resources? Shoot those questions to us and we'll get them to you.
And just on the grant side of the house, that is a temporary item. If the levy were not to pass and we did qualify for the grants, so those only last for a few years. And then we'd be in the same kind of predicament we are now. So it's just a way to kind of spread for a little bit longer. So just on a grant side, that isn't a continual source. It's just a momentary source of revenue for us.
And those grants do require the township to continue at least 1 year after the grant expires. So there are some financial obligations that come with those grants. It's not just free money.
So I think the first question I already answered, but I'll go ahead again and reiterate on that one. The last police levy was tax year 2019. Collection started in 2020. How long will this levy last in terms of adequate funding? We're projecting a 5-year. But again, the projection is as good as we can get, but we're projecting 5 years. It could be less, could be longer, it just depends on what actually happens. How much is the general fund revenue per year? The general fund brings in about $2.8 million per year. Does any funding for the township trustees pay pension or health insurance come from the police fund? No. The only items that are paid from the police fund are for police operations. So it's for our chief, sergeants, lieutenants, officers, and their operations alone. There are no general government activities running through the police fund. And then are the trustees paid salary or per diem? So the elected officials for all townships, the trustees and the fiscal officer, were set salary by Ohio Revised Code. And those are all the questions I got. So
Those are all the written questions. We'll open it up to any questions you want to ask out loud. Okay. Well, again, I'll stress one last time, if you think of anything after you leave, please shoot us an email. We want you to have as much information as possible. Whatever happens on election day, we're still your police department. We're going to be bringing you the best police services we can at the best absolute cost we can bring it to you at. We've always done that. We've always known that that's what's been important for us to have levies continue to pass. So we'll find a way. Whatever resources that you voters decide to give to us, we'll give you the best we can with those resources. And as those questions come up or comments, or if you want to know why we do one thing and not another, or what's going on with what, or what happened with all the police cars on my street last night, you know, I just shoot an email and I'll get you an answer if I can answer it. If not, I'll tell you why I can't. All right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you to everyone who joined us online.